So, this lecture video is going to cover what would have been covered in Tuesday's synchronous class. And for the asynchronous, this would have been posted on Sunday. But we're going to do our best to sally forth the effort to continue on and have a good time with these topics. 4 topics are introduced this week. We will cover logical fallacies and any questions or concerns that you guys have about the definition of race presented by the American Anthropological Association. Thursday, we will cover moral status, and it is looking like I will have to upload another video for that. And then we will begin our synchronous meetings in week 3. If there's any changes to that, I will let you know again. As you read the first reading assignments from the textbook, I want you to keep logical fallacies in mind. And since there's a note-taking review for the moral status reading, I want to go ahead and give you guys some tips about how to appropriately read philosophy. I know many of you are freshmen, some sophomore, and this may be your first philosophy class that you've ever taken. So reading can be daunting. I want you to take your time. That also means that you have to provide a broad enough window of time for yourself to take your time with these readings. That is something that you have to prioritize. You know, there are tons of other classes where you can get away with skimming or just, absorbing Cliff's notes or whatever. That is not possible for this course. So some tips for reading philosophy and taking effective notes include you need to ask yourself what, why, and how. The what questions are, what is the focus of this text? What is the fundamental argument that they're supporting? What's the point they're trying to prove? Why have they written this? Why is it important? What or who is it in response to? What was it written for? How have they proved their point? How does the argument take shape? Do you think that they accomplished all of those goals? So you want to sort of plan for 2 read-throughs, especially at the beginning of the course. Once you get adjusted to how to do this, it can get a little bit easier. But planning for 2 read-throughs enables you to read it normally, just as you would any other content. And then on your second time, you begin your note-taking. You identify the argument, its premises, and its conclusions. You can underline important sections and make a note in the margin as to why they are important. You can document your thoughts on context, such as a piece's connections to other literature, ideas, or theories. This will be extremely useful for your short writing assignments and your final project. Things that require you to reference multiple sources. If you can already start drawing those contextual connections between the readings, you will be in a very good position to succeed with the bigger assignments. Also, take note of any words that you don't recognize and include their definitions in your notes for future reference. So you may be doing some Googling while you're reading and taking notes. You can highlight any sections that inspire questions and write those questions down in the margins. Each class this semester will begin with, you can highlight any sections that inspire questions and write those questions down in the margins or in your notes. Each class this semester will begin with addressing student questions from the readings. So this can include passages that inspired confusion, simply ask for clarification, or you can share your thoughts on what you believe it meant, or you can share any questions that you have jotted down in your notes. So it's really important to give yourself reference points in order to keep the momentum of a discussion going in class. You want to consider the argument's strengths and weaknesses, either its premise or conclusions, and anywhere in between. And we'll kind of go over the structure of a philosophical argument here in a minute. A final step that can be useful is to write a summary of what you have read. Being able to simplify the content can really help with memory retention, as well as contextualizing and synthesizing the information with future readings. I will also say that even though you are in an online course, you can use the discussion board within Blackboard or have an email chain with fellow students. The more that you talk about these things outside of class, or even just share them with friends, ask their opinions, the better you're able to understand the arguments and their relevances to reality. That's a really, really important part of philosophy, is our ability to apply these theories in the way that we think to reality. And if those match up, if they don't, how we can improve those correlations, etc. So I am going to share my screen here. Let's see. And we will talk about logical fallacies. Okay. Okay, a brief introduction to logical fallacies. We will sort of do an introduction, go over useful terms, philosophical argument structure, and types of informal fallacies, and some examples of those. You will have a small quiz over informal fallacies. You'll basically be given a philosophical argument or an example, and it'll be up to you to determine which logical fallacy is being committed in that statement. It will be open book, so you will be able to use this presentation as a reference. I will send all of these slides to you as a PDF, and let's begin. So a logical fallacy occurs when an argument can be disproven through reasoning rather than by addressing the argument's content. For a position to be a logical fallacy, it must be logically flawed or deceptive in some way. So there are two main types. There's formal and informal. Formal fallacies are errors in the structure or form of an argument, whereas informal fallacies arise from errors in the content, context, or delivery of the argument. Some useful terms for you, especially for those of you who have not taken a philosophy class before. Premise, that is the idea or theory on which a statement is based. Claim, that's the statement that something is true, even though you haven't proved it yet. Rebut is to argue that a statement or claim is not true. And a fallacy is an idea that a lot of people think is true or sounds true, but is in fact false. So a typical argument structure is a sequence of sentences where the conclusion is meant to follow from or be supported by the others, the premises. So for example, premise 1, all men are mortal. Premise 2, Socrates is a man. Therefore, conclusion, Socrates is mortal. The structure of this is sound. The conclusion is sound. The reasoning is sound. There's no fallacy committed in this argument. So there are different types of arguments. One is deduction, where the truth of the premises necessitates the conclusion. That's the sort of example that we just looked at. Induction takes observations about past instances or regularities, which lead to conclusions about future instances or general principles. Abduction, that is from the observation of relevant facts, a conclusion is drawn as to what could possibly explain the occurrence of these facts. And analogy, this is the assumption that if two things are similar, then what is true of one of them is likely to be true of the other. So the types of informal fallacies that we're going to be watching for in our readings and in our discussions in class are false correlation and ad hominem on this first slide. False correlation is making a claim that just because two events happen at the same time, that one must have caused the other, or even sometimes that both were caused by the same thing. So an example would be that a recent study found that when ice cream sales rose, the number of shark attacks increased. which would be a false correlation, assuming that the number of shark attacks increased because ice cream sales rose. Ad hominem is attacking the person making the argument rather than addressing the issue or content of the argument itself. So an example of that is if you had graduated from a prestigious school, you would know how to properly grade a writing assignment. So that is a personal attack instead of actually addressing the underlying issue of being improperly graded. Straw man fallacy, one of my favorites. This is when we distort or overstate an opponent's argument to make it easier to attack. So an example is a conversation. A, sure, many video games are violent, but they are just a way for teenagers to vent some of their frustrations. Response, okay, but if you support this type of violence, then I guess you will have no problem with young people going out and shooting up schools. That is definitely a straw man fallacy, to take somebody's acceptance of video games as appropriate outlets and turn that into an acceptance of violence in the real world is a great example of a straw man fallacy. Bandwagon fallacy, you guys can probably guess what that one means. That is claiming an argument is true because it has popular support. The more people that believe it, the more likely others are to accept it as well. So an example is everyone is going on the keto diet. Why aren't you? Scientifically, the keto diet cannot be maintained for extended periods. Putting your body into ketosis for a long time causes us to go into a process called gluconeogenesis, whereby we burn more ATP, we produce less glucose, our brains get less food to operate with, and in the long term, it can be very detrimental to our health. And false dilemma, that's thinking that there are only two possible conclusions when there may be many other alternatives or a single other alternative that have not yet been considered. An example is if we want our country to be safe, we must build more prisons, which discounts the myriad of other social services that can help reduce crime. Appeal to tradition, that's arguing that a traditional practice must be good or better than its newer alternative. It's also sort of denoting a fear of change or not understanding why change would be good if things have been the way they have been for so long. So an example of that is we should continue to use paper books instead of ebooks because that's how we've always done it. Unfortunately, the text for this section is relatively old, so I'm not even sure that you can find an ebook version of it, but if you message me and we talk in private, I might have some recommendations for where you can find some older texts online. Appeal to emotions. This is trying to persuade somebody through their emotions, such as fear, anger, desire, or ridicule, rather than by making a rational case. So an example is, if you buy our product, you could be as happy or as cool in the people in our commercials. And you see this a lot in like Coca-Cola or Budweiser or pretty much any advertising of a product. Appeal to authority, a belief that just because an authority, expert, or a person with influence and power believes something, that it must be true. Example, the mayor said that the crime rate is down. The statistics claiming otherwise must be erroneous. Since the mayor is in charge of the city and supposedly aware of the goings-on, his statement should supersede statistical data. We can probably all see why that would be problematic. My dog just had surgery and she's back. This is Lily. Anyway, okay, back to it. A red herring is an attempt to redirect attention away from a relevant issue by introducing another irrelevant issue. A good example is our government has worked hard to reduce crime. What our country needs is economic growth that can only come from a team that has strong credentials. So what does strong credentials have to do with reducing crime. They seem like they could be related, but the argument doesn't actually make it clear why, how, or why it's important. Um, Slippery slope. You guys have probably heard this one at some point or another. A claim that one event leads to another event and so on until we come to an awful or disastrous conclusion. Example, if we ban guns, the next thing you know, we won't be able to defend ourselves against terrorist attacks. And when that happens, terrorists will invade and take control of our country. Okay, so those are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 logical fallacies that we just covered very quickly. I do not expect you to have these memorized, but I have provided them in PDF form, both for the quiz that you'll be taking, as well as to have on hand as you begin your readings in the textbook. Particularly our first reading from the text by Bell, you will want to pay attention to what logical fallacies are being committed throughout that text. And stop sharing screen. Okay. And if those ideas of logical fallacies are something that interests you, I would highly recommend taking symbolic logic in a future semester. We used to have a class more specific to logical fallacies, but it has since evolved into symbolic logic, which is also a really great course. And I won't be lecturing specifically on the Anthropological Association's statement on race, as it really is pretty simple and easy to digest. If you do have any questions, please just let me know. You should come away with a broad understanding of race and in a socioeconomic way, which is the primary way that we're going to be concerned with race in this course, rather than something biological or scientific. You'll get a little bit deeper of an understanding of that when we dive into the text readings as well. So as you begin the reading on moral status, just keep in mind that you will be providing notes that you've taken on that reading. This is just so that I can confirm that you are learning how to read philosophical texts, you are learning how to take notes on it, and setting yourself up for a success in this course. I will provide a little PDF of how to read philosophy and the little key tips that I went over earlier, so you will have that to reference for your note taking. And I hope that you guys are able to get onto Blackboard, hopefully Tuesday, and if not by Thursday. I know that HR is trying to get my hire date fixed so that I can actually access my faculty email and get something set up for you guys. So fingers crossed. We will get rolling on this as soon as we can. For now, I hope that these video lectures will be enough to get you going. For the asynchronous courses, my future lecture recordings will be far less last minute and higher video quality once I get that access to Blackboard. So hang in there. We're going to do great. Again, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out and let me know. Thanks.